intake. One. So there is a long-standing misconception from a company that makes cast aluminum intakes and large throttle bodies for naturally aspirated Porsches, and it just bugs the shit out of me because it's reverse thermodynamics.
Well, yeah, I want to kind of find the email in writing where it says...
They say it on their website.
Oh, they do now? Okay.
Yeah.
When the intake center plenum gets hotter than the intake air, it will remove temperature from the intake air and absorb it to the hotter surface.
Which is like... I can't even fucking comment on it. It's just goddamn ludicrous. So, let me help you guys. High temperature is high energy. Energy flows from a high place to a low place. Like a ball on the top of a hill doesn't go up the fucking hill, it goes down the hill. Why does it go down the hill? Because the second law of thermodynamics systems want to become less ordered. It takes energy to keep them ordered. One of the resultants of that is when you have high energy, it wants to go to a lower energy state. Things like pressure, things like voltage, things like temperature.
Your gas tank?
Your gas tank. Your bank account generally goes from a high level to a low level unless you are...
It goes up and then it comes down.
And then it comes down. Eventually it comes down. So temperature is a measurement, an indirect measurement of energy. So frictional
There's
losses...
a reason they call it heat energy.
Correct. There's a frictional loss between atoms that are rubbing together that create friction, and temperature is the result of that friction. And a lower temperature state means less friction, less atoms rubbing together. So atoms don't want to rub together, they want to move to a lower energy state. So when we hear things like a metal conductor with atoms that are closer together than a plastic, where the atoms are not as close together, it takes a physical thing to conduct electricity. A physical thing. Air is an insulator. It prevents temperature from moving from one place to another. So this is just fucking pissed me off for years that a company is intentionally misleading their consumers with reverse physics. What the fuck? Literally, what the fuck? Why is Porsche using a plastic intake over an aluminum one? Because it's better and they know it. Why is Dundon using a plastic intake over an aluminum one? Also because it's better and we know it.
A reason, the thermal, which luckily most of our customer base is...
Sorry for getting a little amped up.
Most of our customer base, well-educated. They understand most of this.
Yeah.
Thermodynamic standpoint, even carbon fiber has a higher rate of thermal transfer than PA6, G12.
Carbon fiber is better. More air encapsulated in it, and the carbon itself is better at preventing thermal transfer.
So there is a variant of nylon that's much better. It's one of the best, actually. It's better than what's actually in the intake manifold material Porsche uses. It's less structural, but it's 30 or 40 times less thermally conductive.
Sure.
Which is the stuff we actually use. Something that people don't consider in this world of, hey, Porsche made this 997 GT3 with this
better
intake manifold that's aluminum, it's better. What?
It costs less.
It costs less. So if you go to do a run of injection molding, which anyone out there, please
Yeah.
get a quote on injection molding something.
Let me know how many digits were in that mold, bitches, because
Yeah.
we can afford a lot, but we can't afford that. Jesus Christ.
So if they're only making, and a couple numbers here, 997 GT3, I don't know the number, I think they said they brought 400, 997 GT3,
Yeah.
got ones to North America.
Yeah.
Maybe, I think there's 1,500 they made or something.
Right.
They're, by the numbers they're printing, the 991 GT3, I think they made 29,000. Somebody will correct me if I'm off.
Yeah. There's a lot of 991
991
GT3 and RS
variants.
Yeah.
29,000, not 1,000 or 1,500 or 996 GT2s, but they make 300 to North America.
Right.
But the car,
and all you haters on the 996 missed the boat.
Yep, 2.8. Frozen. Oh,
yeah.
So the cost side of it, is it better? Yes. Now, are they going to spend another $1,000 or $2,000 per car
to make them out of carbon?
To make them, well, not even that, just injection molded plastic.
Yeah.
And it's seen on the X51 Power Kit cars as well, where they have 996 X51, 2004, 2003, somewhere in there when it came out. It's an aluminum intake, manifold halves. The plastic ones were there, but they weren't making that many. They probably only made a couple.
Yeah, it's a very low volume, so making out of cast aluminum is way more economical.
So they're taking cost. We're like, we want to make this much money, not
negative money. Right.
It's more important over the thermal aspect on a street car, where that
would a plastic X51 manifold be better from a performance management or performance standpoint?
Sure.
Yeah.
How much do you want to pay for it? So
that's right.
That's a very important subject. It's another thing to note as far as making money on this while we're here.
And it's another one as to why this potential company that makes them out of cast aluminum, as to why they make them out of cast aluminum.
Well,
because in Indonesia, that's really fucking cheap.
They also sell heat blankets for them too, by the way. Can we? Is it possible to, like, you got chocolate dipped strawberries? Can we take one of these and dip them in like
PA12, and then versus cast aluminum, and demonstrate how much strawberries left?
It's not injection molded; it's injection dipped.
So all my engineering buddies, all my folks that understand heat transfer, all my normal folks. When you grab a plastic thing that's hot, it's not as hot as the metal thing that's hot when you grab it. It's just really that simple. And on the inside, the air experiences the same thing. And when air gets hot, it gets less dense. When air gets less dense, it can carry less fuel because there's less oxygen in it when it gets into the cylinder. This gets us to our next part, cold air intakes with the filter inside the engine bay.
Or
what the fuck is that about?
You know, someone out there, I can't think of his name, probably has an intake kit where they run it all the way up into the front of the car, up to the radiator.
That'd be awesome. Giant dryer hose running through the entire car, coming all the way back. That would be great. That's not exactly what we're talking about. That's pressure inefficiency. It might actually be cold.
No, I meant put it right behind the radiator just to get the cold.
Oh, to get the cold air.
Well, that's
right behind the radiator.
Well, no, yeah, it's cold because the thermal. The hot rate, the engine coolant in the radiator sucks the heat out of the engine.
Right, and the air behind the radiator is cold.
I'm gonna write that down. That sounds on paper.
We should make a patent about that. That's great. So we
don't take that serious.
Please don't take that serious. That was a little bit of tongue-in-cheek farcical.
So hot air is less dense.
Why is that? Oh wait, PV equals nRT. This keeps coming up. Crazy.
Why is that not your license plate?
Actually, that's a good idea. That should be my license plate. I like that. I don't think I can get an equals, but I can get a space.
You get a space, and we got Sharpies.
I like it. You can just draw them on there. Yeah.
I don't know if they make black paint.
If I can write the Navier-Stokes equations on my license plate, that would be even better. But I don't. That's like the whole fucking bumper. So, and I don't want you writing on my bumper. So
just clear brought first, and then.
That's not a bad idea. We can have the license plate be the middle. and then the rest of it be all the rest. What the fuck is that license plate? What are these symbols even about? Sorry, we went super nerd on y'all. We'll come back.
The one something I've always told everyone is, you got a car on the dyno, hood's open, whichever, like front engine car or whatever. Yep. And they got the cone filter in there, hood's open. Hey, it makes power. Put the intake on, made 5-6 horsepower. Cool, whatever.
Yeah. Because the hood was open.
Hood's open.
And you got a fan on it.
Usually somebody's sitting there, whichever, on it. More hot air is always worse than less cold air. Yeah, that's a good way to say that. And that phrase doesn't stick with everyone.
Let me translate. So the detriment to a little bit of hot air is greater than the advantage of the advantage of a little bit of cold air is greater than the disadvantage of a little bit of hot air. One way to say it.
Yeah. The mass on it.
Yeah.
And there's a video Philip found the other week that actually highlights this really well.
That's great.
Is if you have air mass, the flow number, which we haven't said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to make
flow, air mass, pressure.
So air mass,
the relationships
is what matters.
Yep.
Not the flow. You can have a cubic feet of air flow through an orifice at a certain rate.
Yep.
But if it's at sea level versus 10,000 feet, the density
because air has mass, go back to our aerodynamics 101.
Yeah. The cubic feet measurement out in space 300, 400 miles up might have two oxymoles.
Yep. That's 1 cubic foot of, I'll just call it air.
Yeah.
So the density is what matters. Now, when you take cold air, and this is why it matters when somebody says, hey, I put an intake on it, and I got a 4-inch, 3-inch intake, whatever, this makes more power.
It flows more, so therefore it's better.
So per given state, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
What the reason why I say less hot air, more hot air is worse than less cold air when you have a cross-sectional area, an orifice, which throttle body is something, and you are trying to move more air or a certain amount of air through that. You're limited. When you have hot air, it's expanded. So to have the same air mass,
less oxygen
to burn the less fuel per size, you need a larger. If you have
a larger volume per unit,
a pound of air at sea level, is more compact than a pound of air in depth.
At high speed.
It is expanded further. So you need a larger orifice to move that same amount of air through it.
Yep.
So when you have cooler air that's more dense, you can move it through a smaller cross-sectional area.
You can move the same number of oxygen molecules through that cross-sectional area.
Correct. So when you have hotter air and you're sucking it in from behind the radiator, which I did the thermal math for a couple guys on this, on the difference, how much bigger the intercooler was from sucking that in, the real math.
Right.
And it was like the glass.
Put it in front of the radiator.
Even just ducting it. But the difference, even just calculating that out, is you have this little bit of air.
Yep.
And then now you have all this extra air.
Yep.
But it's through a smaller orifice.
Yep.
But it's more dense.
Yep.
How do you deal with air density in the aspect of, hey, I want to make power? Well, what does everybody do? They put a turbo on it. Turbo increases air density.
Yes.
So why would you increase air density? So cooler air is naturally more dense. Why do you have an intercooler on a turbocharged car? You want to
trying to redensify. Right.
If hot air matters,
that's good engineering.
Why would you have an intercooler on an engine? So if you have an intercooler on your turbo build car, whichever, doesn't matter, anything. And you have the air filter behind the radiator, the argument's generally, I have an intercooler, it's going to remove the heat.
No, you made it thermally inefficient, and you're making your problem even harder.
But why did you put the intercooler in there in the first place? You put the intercooler in because you're trying to make the air
denser.
More dense.
Correct.
So why not start with a more dense starting point?
Start it more dense so that when you heat it up, it's not as less dense. That's a whole lot of double negatives.
Correct.
But then you can redensify it, also a good engineering term, you're welcome, to enable the engine to make more power. In a naturally aspirated sense, we don't have a turbocharger. We can't redensify. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it. We can't make it
condensed?
More concentrated. That's a better word.
Yeah,
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Redensify or condense. I'm going to have another sip of whiskey and I'll come up with more words that you have never heard before.
I'm going to start naming. We're going to change intercooler, which is just
the redensifier.
It's a heat exchanger, right? So we're going to just call it the condenser.
The condenser, because it technically is a condenser. So if you start with lower temperature air, it is more dense. There are more molecules of oxygen to be able to get into the engine. And with more molecules of oxygen, you can combine them with more molecules of fuel that make a bigger band, that create more cylinder pressure, that push down on the piston more, which creates more work per unit time, which eventually, as you combine it with 6 cylinders firing at a number of revolutions per minute, more power.
Horsepower.
More horsepower. So that is why you want cold air. If the shit is not sealed to the outside of the engine bay, it's wrong.
It's also something we see, again, in logs, because we've looked at hundreds, is when you have...
Oh, fuck. Dynos on cars with...
Not even just on the dyno, because we do have heat soak from the engine where the heat goes up, but just driving the car down the street and you get a log and it logs in Cobb that we use, you have ambient air temp. It might say it's 70 degrees out, and then you deal with intake air temp. And when you're cruising down the road slow, throttle plates closed, you have the air coming into the engines really slow.
Yep.
So the air temp at the sensor in the plenum might be 90 degrees. Ambient's here, we're up here.
Yep.
You go full throttle downshift, your air temp will drop because you have a higher air mass coming in. You're cooling the sensor off.
I used flow. It does occasionally. Occasionally, it's an important word to use
for the right term, for the right reason. And the air temp will generally drop, and it will stay close. It usually won't be, but if it's 70 degrees out, it might be 72, 73, 74.
It'll be a couple degrees over ambient.
Cast iron intake manifold cars.
Yep.
They're a 997 GT3. This gap, and it has air temp. Imagine it's got a mass airflow sensor, but the air temperature difference in it will be about 20 degrees.
Sure.
With the stock intake manifold. Now, this is air that's entering the cylinder, not as measured by the mass airflow sensor. Well, so that's what's interesting with this, is this will be full throttle. You have the air coming into the engine.
Yep.
And you have the air box. Air comes in through the deck lid, into the air box, through the filter, and into the mass airflow sensor.
Yep.
On those cars with the aluminum intake manifold versus ours, it'll still show a little bit of a difference, but generally it's about 15 to 20 degrees off. The whole air box has all the engine bay heat that absorbs under the air box a little bit, and so it's always warmer than ambient by more than like a 981 GT4. That's a little bit more isolated with how the air box is just designed.
Which is crazy because GT4 is a mid-engine car. You would expect that it would be hotter.
Correct. There's just no way on that. Now on a 997.2 GT3 RS, it's got the vents in the bumper.
Yeah.
All the engine bay air goes around the air box.
Sure. It helps cool it.
So, or
helps the heat escape. There we go.
But all that hot air goes right. It literally hits the air box.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So it's not. That's. So I got caught. It actually is going to be heating up the air box locally.
So what I've done and somewhere in, not on iPad, somewhere on computer, on a computer, I have logs from a few cars where I took a separate air temp sensor, put it down inside one of the runners, did this on 991 GT3 as well, with our intake at least. And the difference from the ambient temp sensor to the mass airflow temp sensor to the one in the runner that we put in the runner on it is it will go from, even on the aluminum car that I might have drilled a hole in. And
might have.
The temp drop, it gets pretty close to where we're 5-6 degrees off with all of our parts in our plastic 3D printed intake manifold. And the power difference is there. The reason that I find the most why the power difference is there is that cooler air, the car's not running on the NOx sensors as much. So we got a stock engine that makes 350 wheel, and we put exhaust on it, whichever in the stock intake, and we're in the 370, 375 range or so, 25-ish peak, and it's pretty good, pretty happy. Get the tune done where it's not knocking or whichever, and then we throw our intake on it, makes another 35, 40 peak on it, and it's still not knocking. And then you can actually start giving it more ignition advance to where it's happy,
right?
And it's still not knocking.
Yep.
and then you go drive the car, and now it's end of the day out, and it's even 70, 80 degree intake air temp versus maybe 60 in the dyno, and it's still really happy.
Yeah.
It's making more power, cylinder pressure's higher. 10% increase in power doesn't mean 10% increase in cylinder pressure necessarily.
Yeah.
But we are moving more air through the cylinder, through the engine, more fuel. So the knock level, the knock sensitivity should be higher. But because our air temperature is cooler,
more atoms.
There's more air in the cylinder, but the temperature of the air does play a role in the thermal, the cooler air, how it reacts with the fuel, atomized fuel, and then the engine itself.
There's less energy.
There's less energy. There's less heat in the cylinder to start with the burn.
Right.
So the engine's usually less knock sensitive.
The things that folks need to understand is things don't happen once in an internal combustion engine. Here we go, spit it out. They happen over and over again, and they happen over and over again in quick sequence. So the amount of stability that you can maintain in that sequence is going to allow you to magnify or concentrate the power benefits of what it is you just tried to accomplish.
And a lot of that's just being consistent, because you don't want to make, say, 500 horsepower once on the dyno. You want it to be, which is one thing I'm actually pretty good about. You want it to be, hey, we made 500 horsepower once, and every other run makes 490. Well, the car's not going to run at that.
Right.
You want max power all the time. You want it to be consistent, which on these engines, 8,000 RPMs, that's 8,000 revolutions or 4,000 power strokes in a minute. 4,000 divided by 60 is 133 and a third. And then that's revolutions per, 8,000. No. So
3/2.
Half of that. So 66 and 2/3, power strokes per second. So you want in per second, you have that many power strokes in and out, air's going in and out cylinder. You want it to be consistent and the same. You still have all the heat being created, and it's going to disperse somewhere.
And this is why when we tell folks what the power numbers are for the gains in our products, be they headers or intakes or tunes or the combination of all of those things, this is 7, 8, 9 dyno pulls in a row. Charles is trying hard to make the car to choke. To flinch.
Usually it will always.
It doesn't.
Get it to where it's happy, it's consistent.
And then do it again and again.
Eventually, you need to know, we'll get the car hot.
Yep.
And it should reduce power either from thermal standpoint. Or knock sensitivity, and it's starting to detonate.
Create hot spots in the cylinders or whatever it is. That's 201 discussion. We'll come back to that.
And that's important, because when our parts leave this building, get everyone's car, we want everyone to have the same results that we get here.
And they're going to COTA, and they're going to Sebring, and they're going to Daytona, and they're going to the Nürburgring. They're going to all these racetracks all around the world that they're going to get beat the fuck out of. So we got to make sure that when they're being tortured, they produce those results, not on the possible best case they produce those results.
Send a full D4 kit to Dubai where it's always 120 degrees out. It needs to be, it's not going to make the same power at 120 degrees as it does here, but it needs to be consistent. We say it's this much better. It needs to be this much better.
That delta needs to be maintained. Correct. Yeah. All right. So,
and they don't have cold air over there. They're out of stock. So
so metal bad, plastic good, heat bad, cold good, an intake that allows you to maintain a lower temperature and a higher density of the air coming in is better.